or a seminar, the after lunch session is the graveyard session. So I hope you all are not going to go to sleep on me. Okay, so I just the way I like to conduct my sessions really is to first of all understand where we should start from, and I think that is important. Just in order to have a focus. So can I just ask all of you to tell me how many of you are aware of the disability laws that prevail in India? Does anybody have any idea at all? No. Okay. So we basically have 4 laws. The 4 laws are the first one was the Rehabilitation Council of India Act. It's actually the most minor of the laws, and it deals with trainings and certification essentially. So in the disability sector, all kinds of certifications come from the Rehabilitation Council of India, curriculums and things like that. Then we have the Mental Health Act. The Mental Health Act is actually supposedly an improvement on the Indian Lunacy Act, came in 1987, and it essentially came as a lot of hue and cry, was there because there was a lot of issues in the mental health sector. Now, actually, it's an act which is split the mental health sector into 2 parts, because the act per se deals only with institutionalization of persons with mental illness and what will happen, how those institutions will run, and it also deals in a certain sense with the mentally ill destitute on the streets. But anybody else in the care of families, in communities, has been completely left out of the purview of the act. It's not a very nice act at all. Let me put it that way. There's no human rights component in the act, practically none at all. And it's also an act that in India really hasn't worked very well because we don't have the manpower to make it work. The third act is the Persons with Disabilities, Equal Opportunities, Full Participation and a Non-Discrimination Act. And this is an act which covers 7 disabilities. It defines a percentage of disability to be eligible to be called, disabled in purview of the act. And then it goes on to deal with a lot of life domains like employment, education, social security, non-discrimination. It has something about prevention and early intervention as well. So I would like to discuss all these acts in the light of how they have panned out through the case law. And then finally we come to the 4th act, which is the National Trust Act. It's known as the National Trust Act in short, but the full title of the act is the National Trust for Welfare of Persons with Autism, Cerebral Palsy, Mental Retardation and Multiple Disabilities. This is our newest act, and it's really an act which today we are arguing to expand the scope of this act, and it's really an act for high support needs. So people who need supported decision making, of course, in today's scenario, it is supplanted decision making. Are the people who form the purview of this act, but it's at the moment very restrictive because it restricts itself only to 4 kinds of disabilities, unfortunately. So there is a lot of hue and cry at the moment that it needs to be extended to, for example, cover persons with muscular dystrophy and so on and so forth. People with high support needs who may or may not have autism, cerebral palsy, mental retardation and multiple disabilities. So now, when we look at the gamut of disability laws in this country, what I want to say is that going beyond this and before this, we had the Constitution. And under the Constitution, Articles 14, 15, 16, 14 is equality before the law and equal treatment. 15 is non-discrimination on the grounds of, they've listed out certain things, disability is not part of them, but if there is an arguable case, and it has been made, that disability just fits in justum generis and ought to be part of that definition. 16 is positive discrimination, which in disability we make a lot of use of Article 16, because essentially it's that you cannot treat people who are not equally, because that in itself is a discrimination. So you need to give them something a little extra so that they come onto the same level playing field. Yeah. Article 19, we've made a lot of use of Article of 21. We've made a lot of use of Article 21, particularly in the mental health sector. And all these articles actually preceded all disability laws, obviously because they're part of the Constitution. So there is a certain body of case law that actually happened prior to even the disability acts, the so-called, the 4 disability acts that came into being. There is a certain body of litigation that had already happened. For example, the Persons with Disabilities Act came in 1995, but as far back as 1992 already, there was a case known as Indira Sawhney versus Union of India, and it was essentially for defining what are backward classes and what they're going to get. In India, it's very popularly known as the Mandal Commission case, because the Mandal Commission was set up, and that's when the other backward classes were defined. And interestingly, it was a full bench judgment, and there was one dissenting judge who said, I do not agree with the majority, and I don't think that reservation should be extended to so many classes of backward people, because it's really going to tip the scales very badly against the general category. However, even in the dissenting judgment, interestingly, disability, the dissenting judge said very clearly, is one particularized class that needs to actually be given reservation. So there is a clear understanding that there has been a certain kind of discrimination against disabled persons, and this discrimination needs to actually be taken care of by giving taking positive steps to ensure that their rights are met in an equalized kind of fashion. Indira Sawhney actually already set the note on that one. And so that was a very clear understanding, and in fact that was a precursor to the Disabilities Act when it came in 1995. Now there have also been, under Articles 41, 45 and 47 of the Constitution, there have also been litigations by an organization called Social Juris, and these are again directly in the Constitution asking for the right to education of disabled children. So we have an entire chapter on education within the Disabilities Act, and what I'm trying to say is that this litigation was actually prior in time. It relied on the Constitution, and it actually did get results. And the reason I'm saying this is because sometimes we find that it's notwithstanding the disability law, it's good to also look very carefully at the Constitution and see where it gives us some sort of a fillip. And believe me, we need everything that we can get when it comes to disability, because as I'm sure you are aware in your own countries, the biggest problem that we have is implementation of disability laws. It's very nice to have, nice laws in the statute books, but the issue is that in the implementation, we come up against a stumbling block each time and every time. Yeah? Are there any questions at this point of time, in the sense that does anybody need any clarifications on what I've said? Sorry, I'm afraid that's what I was saying. If you could just come up a little bit, maybe.
I was just wondering, when was your Disability Act enacted?
1995.
And how many you said? 4?
Yeah, there are 4 of them.
4 of
So there's 87.
Yeah.
Then there's 89. Then there's 95, and then there is 2000. The National Trust Act is the latest. That's 2000.
Yeah.
That basically recognized the need for a supported lifestyle structure.
Yeah.
It deals with guardianship of persons with all the 4 disabilities mentioned within the purview of the Act.
Okay.
It deals with also, actually that's the unfortunate part, the National Trust Act, if you read it, it's a very bare kind of an act, and it looks as if it's only meant to provide guardianship and some sort of a monitoring body for that guardianship. However, today the National Trust is doing a lot of work, and surprisingly it's the one act in which we really don't have litigation. You know, oddly enough, that's the scenario. We don't have litigation in the National Trust Act. But the reason is that I think because the chairperson is herself a person who has run an NGO and who was running it very successfully, and she's recently won a UNESCO award. She has expanded the scope. Again, this is another thing. You see, the thing is that the scope of certain acts can also get expanded if you have someone who is good with implementation. So looking at the preamble of the National Trust Act and actually away from litigation, what we found is that today the National Trust has established a film festival for disability. They have started to set up independent and group living centers. So there's a lot of activity that's happening. There's a parallel body which has now come up, which is a marketing organization for disabled persons. But all of this has happened actually without litigation.
Is there any public interest litigation on your behalf with in many more like sister organizations, those who are working in this field?
Oh yes, there's a huge catena of case law on the subject. Now I'm going to be sharing some of them with you right now. Okay, so interesting. I actually want to address first of all this whole question of the advantage of having a disability law in place. One of the advantages is that because disability law is a specific law, if you manage to get a particular provision